Hello, I'm Susan McCrossan and this is my book, Breaking the Learning Barrier. Okay, so what is often suggested to parents of children with learning difficulties is that they have some sort of structure or organization or have lists to follow. What's not understood is that the child that has something like ADD or ADHD doesn't have good access to the logic processing of their brain. So they're unable to follow lists, to even think about lists. And as soon as it's out of their sight, then they forget about the list. They're not going back to the list all the time. So that lack of access to logic function is what's really holding up children, or adults for that matter, who, they don't have that organization ability. They work for people who who say, well, you don't seem to be organized, or, why didn't you remember what I told you yesterday? Or why didn't you, here we did this list, why haven't you followed it? So there's a whole premise that if they just show the adult or the child what is needed, that they will be able to follow it in some way. But in fact, they can't follow it because they don't have enough access to the logical side of their brain, which then enables them to be more rational, more logical. It also enables them to be able to learn more easily, and then the diagnosis tends to go away, and then you're able to be successful in life, whether you're working at school, just doing your homework, getting tasks completed, getting assignments handed in, even remembering to hand them in, because that's another problem, that the kid does the assignment. And then for some reason the teachers don't seem to ask for it, and the child's expected to remember to hand it in, and of course they can't. And so they end up getting lower grades just because the work hasn't been given to the teacher. And part of what Crossinology does then is get that logical side of the brain open and enable people to be organized, to follow lists and to have structure, and enable them to be better spellers and readers and writers, because spelling and reading, particularly spelling in English, because it's what they call a visual language, there's no pronunciation rules, and that's because it's a mixed language from other languages. So if you don't make it the image in your mind's eye, then you've got to try and guess what the word spells like by doing it how it sounds. And phonetically, I think most people, all adults, would realize that that's not a successful strategy in English. So you need to be able to make the image with the logical side of the brain and then store it and retrieve it with the creative side of your brain. And then with reading, you read with the creative side, and reading comprehension comes out of logic. So both of those key tasks, which are fundamental to learning and education, require you to have good access to both sides of your brain. Okay, so what Crossinology does, it's an acupressure technique that has been designed to access or open up access to the parts of the brain that the person is not using, and that varies between individuals, but there are certain types. And it's a gentle, we use muscle testing, pushing on an arm to get information back from the subconscious, because the muscles are controlled by the subconscious part of the mind. And we get information from that. We have, I've developed a technique for asking very specific questions of the brain, energetic questions if you like. And then with gentle acupressure, just gently holding the head, you can open up those areas. And as you progress through what's approximately about 80 steps, the ability to be able to do the things that are required to get through the education system become more available, and you are then able to do the task, and you end up with reports with Johnny's trying better now, or he's trying much harder, like effort was going to make a difference, which it doesn't. So there are many children and and adults that I've worked on, but I think probably the most remarkable thing is people that are still at school, so children, because they're still going through the education system, and they're being tested, if you like. And when you have a child, come back and tell you that they just got 10 out of 10 in a spelling test for the first time in their life, and they can stand up and look you in the eyes, and they don't have this sort of beaten down attitude, there's nothing more rewarding, I think, than seeing people shine. And that ability to do that, or the grades suddenly change, then it's assumed from the teacher's point of view that somebody, something just miraculously happened. Or in fact, my nephew in England, I was staying with him and my cousin, actually it's my cousin's son, was studying graphic design, and I happened to be staying with them for a couple of weeks, and I was talking with his mother, and she was talking about the fact that he had ADHD. And I said, well, for goodness sakes, you know what I do, surely? No, she didn't really know, and she lived in another country, so it hadn't been made clear. So anyway, we called him downstairs, Stuart, and I worked on Stuart. It took about 4 hours of gentle pressure. That was a Sunday. Monday, he goes back to school. He's in class. I gather it was a relatively small class, so doing this design class. The teacher just turned to him and said, what happened to you on the weekend? Someone turn your brain on? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, my aunt was here and she did, right? And so people do notice, right? And that was one of the funnier, because he was actually completely accurate with what he said. That was one of the more amusing bits of feedback. But most, the commonest feedback would be, oh, he just matured. He suddenly tried harder or whatever, Mm-hmm. Then sometimes the school puts them in a category that they can't get out of. Mm-hmm. And I've had a few people that have had to change schools, and then if you don't tell the new school what the history is, the new school just treats them as normal, and everything goes along fine, and the stigma gets taken away. So I am Susan McCrossan. You can find out more if you're interested at the website crossinology.com.